I look ridiculous in this thing. The good news is now nobody can see who I am. So while I was doing some looking around, looking for inspirations and ideas for the Viking costumes, one of the things that I came across was the idea that helmets may have been a lot more common and popular than we see on the shows, again, for obvious reasons. So I started my helmet build. I'll put the first part of the build up in the links. This is part 3, the eyeguard. Obviously, like everything else, debate whether or not they were really used, but I wanted to try and make one and put one out. It's fairly simple. This is a fairly short video. There wasn't a lot to it. It's just a lightweight sheet of 14 gauge aluminum that I drilled some holes in to rivet it to the helm and gave it a little bit of profile for the nose to give the sheet a little bit more rigidity, and then banged out a little bit of relief around the eyes and stuff like that. Nothing real fancy. I'm going to leave it rough hammered like the rest of the helm, just because. So while I was test fitting this helmet, I noticed that the ends of the rivets were poking into my skull, and I didn't like it very much. So I took a thin, lightweight piece of packing foam, cut it so that it was the same length as the dome, and took a couple of pieces of double-sided sticky tape, stuck it to the inside of the thing, just to cover the ends of the rivets. Now, if I put the little halo or crown, I still don't know what those things are called, in there, this shouldn't matter, but just to be on the safe side. Now, onto the build. Took a piece of paper, drew a little grid, again, helped keep everything lined up and symmetrical. Drew the profile that I thought I was going to use, and then ended up not liking it, so I drew something else. Cut out the something else that I drew, then drew some eyes in the piece of paper, because it's really hard to see through a 14 gauge sheet of aluminum. Of course, if the pulse rate goes the way I'm wanting it to, I'm not going to be able to see where I'm going by Saturday morning anyways. Cut out the eyes, opened it up, taped it in place, and did a test fit in the mirror, and that was when I discovered that I looked just as ridiculous with the eye guard on as I do with just the helmet. See? Took it outside of the garage and traced it out onto a scrap piece of aluminum. Cut it out with a couple pairs of metal shears. Then took it to the 3-in-1 for the slip rollers to give it some curve. It took a couple of attempts before I got it curved right, but once I finally had it curved right, it was to the sander. Cleaned up the profile and sanded off the rough edges. I then used a large drill bit to drill holes in the eyes. I did 3 or 4 of them in each one. Once I had the holes drilled, I used a cutoff wheel to connect the holes, and that pretty much let me get most of the eyes out. Once I had the eyes cut out roughly, cleaned them up with a Tim Snips a little bit, and then a lot of filing work. Yes, I know, it sounds like my cutoff wheel is not operating properly. It's because I've got the air throttled way back to try and keep from scarring the eye guard up before I'm ready. Once I had everything filed down and I thought I was going to be happy with it, I went through and cleaned up the mask with acetone just to make sure that the lines looked good with no black markers all over them. Then put the eye guard back on, marked the band that I left on when I did the original assembly, and cut them out with a pair of Tim Snips and a combination of file and angle grinder with a sanding disc on it to clean up the edges so that they can't be seen from behind the eye guard. One more test fit. When I was happy with it, I took the eye guard back off, nailed a piece of steel rod to a 2x4, and used that as a form to beat a little bit of profile into the nose guard. Then used a hammer and dolly and rolled over the edges just a little bit. Used a cutoff wheel to grind down to the head of the bottom 2 rivets on the band, and then drilled those 2 rivets out, knocked them out with a punch so that I could rivet the eye guard on in those places. Clamped the eye guard back in place, turned it upside down, and then drilled through one of the original 2 holes. and attached that with a rivet, and then did the other one from the outside just to make sure everything was lined up as much as I could get it. I reclamped everything, tapped the rivets in place, and then squished them down. And from there, it was just working from the inside out until I had the entire thing riveted. I then made myself comfortable on my shrinking stump, and using a combination of a couple hammers and a couple of dollies, gave the mask a little bit of profile by sinking in the area right around the eyes to give the whole thing a little bit more depth. Also had the benefit of making it look like it was not a sheet of aluminum. So I'd say this is probably mostly done. All I've got left to do is figure out how I'm going to affix the little thing that goes on the inside that holds it on my head and the leather strap. And that'll be fairly simple. I'm waiting to finish up a couple other leather projects to make sure that I don't have any scrap that I can't use for these that'll work better. But for the most part, nice and lightweight, reasonably comfortable. There's some space around my head for some airflow, so it shouldn't be too hot in the Atlanta sun during the parade. I'll see you next week.